Hi guys. So I am finally able to upload Moses' willingness to suffer the plagues of Egypt. I'm so excited. Last week was utterly insane, so I'm sorry that I did not get a chance to do this, but I took the time to study a little bit more and I'm really glad I did. So, the first thing I want to say for this video is I'm really excited to talk about something positive with Moses because I know the first two were like kind of more negative parts of the Moses mentality. But Moses, he was really submitted. Like, oh my gosh. Because when you start reading about the plagues of Egypt that he went through and how miserable that had to have been, because not all of the plagues were strictly for the Egyptians. You know, a lot of them, or at least half of them anyway, were for the Israelites had to suffer through them too. And so you start going through the plagues of Egypt, and I'm going to go ahead and look off my list here just so I don't get them wrong, like the order. So first you had the water to blood, which the magicians could replicate. So first off, he had to have been horribly thirsty that entire time, and like being thirsty and being hungry is absolutely miserable and it'll make anyone cranky. So there was that. Then you have the frogs, which was the second plague. And this is the first thing that I actually noticed, is not only did Moses have to suffer through God's frogs, he had to suffer through the frogs that the magicians brought about, in addition to the frogs that God brought about. And so there had to have been a ridiculous number of frogs that he had to wade through to get anywhere. And then he goes to Pharaoh to get rid of the frogs, or rather, Pharaoh calls for Moses. And this part I want to read to you guys because this is unbelievable to me how crazy submitted Moses was to this process. So it says, starting in Exodus 8:8. Then Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron and said, "Entreat the Lord that he may take away the frogs from me and from my people, and I will let the people go that they may sacrifice to the Lord." And Moses said to Pharaoh, "Accept the honor of saying when I shall intercede for you, for your servants and for your people, to destroy the frogs from you and your houses, that they may remain in the river only." So this wasn't even necessarily from God that Moses said that. Moses just went ahead and said, "Okay, Pharaoh, you decide when the frogs go." And I can just picture the look on Moses' face so well when Moses says, or I'm sorry, when Pharaoh says, "Tomorrow." And Moses, in my mind, begrudgingly says, "Okay, let it be according to your word, that you may know that there is no one like the Lord our God. And these frogs shall depart from you, from your houses, from your servants, and from your people. They shall remain in the river only." And it's absolutely insane to me how many times, because this isn't the only time that that Moses asks Pharaoh, "When do you want me to intercede for your people?" And Pharaoh says, "Tomorrow." This isn't the only plague that he does that with. Then you have the lice. The flies were also tomorrow. The dead livestock. Can you imagine how miserable the lice would have been alone? And then how much stench permeated the land of Egypt from the dead livestock. You know, not just because of the heat alone, but then you have the boils and the hail and the locusts. And even by the locusts, Pharaoh's men were pleading with him, "Please just let them go so we can get on with our lives and get rid of this guy." And Pharaoh just kept saying, "Nah," pretty much. And then you have the darkness and the death of the firstborn. Now, the thing that's crazy to me about the death of the firstborn is, can you imagine how little sleep Moses would have gotten that night? And the rest of the Israelites would have gotten that night, listening to the screams, like, minute in and minute out as the angel of death passed over everybody. So, Moses was really submitted to suffering. And I know I was kind of going quickly just because we're already at like the 5-minute mark. But having the mindset of a willingness to suffer is a very positive thing. And the reason I say that is because you find a pattern of calling, suffering, and deliverance all throughout the Old Testament. Whenever a prophet or a warrior was called, there was a time of, there was that initial calling. Then there was suffering and deliverance, either of people or personally. So, in addition to Moses, it happened with Noah and Daniel and Gideon. I mean, Gideon, when he was first called, before he could actually complete his purpose, he was practically ran out of town because his whole, pretty much all of his people and all of his father's people were angry at him for burning down the groves and the idols. And then, you have Noah, who was called to build the ark, and then endured, I don't remember, what was it, 80 years or something of mocking and, cruelty, and then God delivered him, when he sent the flood and his family. And then, you have Daniel in the lion's den. And it's just, there's something to be said for being called of God to do something and then willing to go through the process. And I realize what time it is, guys. I'll wrap it up here in just a second. But there is a quote, I don't know where it originated from, but it talks about how everybody wants the anointing, but nobody likes the pressing that it takes to get the oil. And this whole suffering aspect, I think it really does prepare you for the call of God, whatever he's called you to do. And not every calling is going to have suffering attached to it. That's not at all what I'm saying. But for certain callings and certain people, there will be a season of preparation that's probably pretty miserable. And it's totally okay to pray to God for strength to, help you out and help you get through it. Because ultimately, if you can pass the test of your season of suffering, then God knows you'll be able to handle what's next. And in Moses' case, that was 40 years of dealing with the Israelites, with the constant whining and complaining and moaning. Next time, though, sorry, no, this is a little bit of a longer video, and I know I was talking fast. Next time, I want to talk about, let me look at my notes, I'm so sorry. I forgot what I was titling it. I was titling it The Building of Faithfulness for Tomorrow, about Moses and the sheep and how before God even called Moses, he was preparing him for what was coming next. Anyway, thank you guys. Love you all.